As you all probably have heard by now, the lawsuit involving Mr. Bill Cosby, the latest one at least that just came out, that's been all over the news, is that a jury here in California has awarded the plaintiff, in this case, looks like about $60 million, where the jury awarded her right around, I think it's like $19 million in damages, and then they turned around and tacked on $40 million in punitive damages. And I've stated before, you guys have heard me talk about this before in different videos in the past, that I particularly am not a fan of lawsuits that go back so far. Not about the merits, not about the contents therein, but strictly about cases where they go back so far that it makes it difficult for the plaintiff to A, be able to put on an effective case, and B, for the defendant to plan and prepare a reasonable defense of these cases. Most attorneys feel the same way because it is difficult to, like I say, A, prove them, and also B, defend them. Mainly because most states have a statute of limitations, primarily because of those two reasons. It's difficult to put on the case when you have something from so long ago because it's difficult to find witnesses, it's difficult for people to remember things, it's difficult for evidence to be preserved in its original capacity, as well as other things. And it goes on both sides, plaintiff and defendant. So I'm not particularly a fan of these cases that go back so far. It doesn't matter who it is. It's not even talking about this case in particular, but just in general. And most attorneys agree. Most prosecutors will not take cases that come from so long ago because of the aforementioned reasons. I've been hearing a lot of confusion all over the social media regarding this case. A lot of people on their platforms said, oh, Mr. Bill Cosby has been found guilty of assaulting a woman, or Mr. Cosby is guilty of these crimes. Well, remember, if you look at this case, this is a civil claim, right? And you know it's a civil claim and not a criminal case because when you look at the actual complaint, you see the plaintiff's, the private citizen's name and who they're suing and what they're suing for. Whenever you see that, you know that it's a civil case. If it was a criminal case, instead of the private citizen's name, you would see the state's name of whatever state this person's being prosecuted in, or if it's a federal crime, you see the United States versus whoever the defendant is. But in this case, whenever you see a private citizen's name, as you see here, it is a civil case. And the main difference with civil cases is that they do not discuss guilt or innocence. That is not the objective of a civil case. The objective of a civil case is to find out basically the plaintiff's claim and their allegations and what they allege that they have been damaged and who they feel is responsible for the damages. So in civil cases, you talk about liability. You don't discuss guilty or not guilty. You discuss liability. And liability is just a way of saying who is responsible, who the plaintiff is alleging is responsible for their damages. And here in this case, as you look at the general allegations, it said she was drugged and essayed by the defendant, William Bill Cosby, in 1972. Now, that's over 50 years ago. And like I mentioned earlier, statute of limitation issue typically bar these type of complaints, but most states have removed statute of limitations for these types of cases. But typically in any other type of cases, you maybe have a year or two to bring a wrongful death lawsuit or a breach of contract lawsuit, which typically is 4 years, but never something like this. This is something fairly new. It's in the law, and so they allow them to do this. And they go back 1972, which is like 54 years ago. But if you look at it here, these are the allegations, and she said this has happened to her, but regardless, he is liable. I'm alleging that he is responsible for the damages that I have incurred. And then the jury ruled and heard verdicts. I mean, they heard they heard the evidence, and they ruled in favor of the plaintiff. Said, yes, we do find Mr. Cosby liable for these damages, and to the tune of, as you see, $60 million. So, but the burden of proof here in these cases, for civil cases, It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. Again, that's criminal cases. And in the civil cases, the burden of proof is more likely than not, which is what they call a preponderance of the evidence, which is a lower bar to meet than you have in a criminal case. So here in this case, the jury felt that the plaintiff met their burden of proof by saying more likely than not, which means more than 50% chance that Mr. Cosby is responsible for the damages that this plaintiff has incurred from these allegations. So that's where it is. Of course, now since you have this verdict, I think Mr. Cosby, it says here he's 88 years old and she's around 84 or something like that. And Mr. Cosby's lawyers have already intimated that they plan to appeal. So good luck on this plaintiff actually collecting on this, because collections from a lawsuit is a process. It's not like, you know, the jury rules and the defendant just right there in court just turns around and hands him a check. No, there is a process, and especially now if he's planning on appealing, it's going to take even longer for the plaintiff to actually collect on this, if they collect at all, because in appeals, the appeals court may rule either way. You never know. But if you were the judge and jury in this case, how would you have ruled on this? How do you guys feel about these cases going back so many years, and the ability to put on the case, preserve evidence, preserve witnesses, memories, and actually preserve and preparing the defense, even bigger than this case? Put it in the comments below.